Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about waking up. We all do it every morning, but my story is about waking up from a 10-year sleep, a darkness that had consumed a third of my life. I awoke in a world I didn't recognize, a life I didn't remember, and my only guide, my only light in that profound darkness was my wife. She was my memory, my history, my savior. She held my hand and she walked me through the ruins of the life I had apparently failed at, caring for my broken body and my broken mind with the selfless devotion of a saint. I worshipped her for it. I built a new life on the foundation of her goodness, on the bedrock of her sacrifice. This story is about the day that foundation crumbled, the day I learned that she was not my savior, but my jailer. It's about the horrifying realization that she hadn't been caring for a man she loved. She had been guarding a tomb, waiting for the day she could finally seal it shut for good. My first real memory is the color white, the sterile, unforgiving white of a hospital ceiling. The sound was a low, rhythmic beep, a mechanical heartbeat that was not my own. There was a woman sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. Her face was a portrait of beautiful, exhausted relief. She had tears in her eyes, tears that I somehow knew were for me. She told me she was my wife. She told me my name. She told me I had been in a car accident, a terrible one. She told me I had been in a coma for 3 weeks. And then she told me the thing that would become the new, terrifying center of my universe. I had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. The last 10 years of my life, she explained, were gone. A complete blank black void. I was a man of 42 with the memory of a 32-year-old. A decade of my own existence had been wiped clean. The terror of that is something I cannot properly describe. It is a unique and profound form of vertigo, the feeling of standing on a cliff edge with no memory of how you got there. She was my only anchor in that spinning, senseless world. Her hand in mine was the only thing that felt real. She was my historian, my storyteller. In the weeks and months that followed, as I slowly began the arduous process of learning to walk and talk again, she began to rebuild my past for me. She would bring in photo albums and she would tell me the stories behind the pictures. And the story she told was a sad one. It was a story of struggle, of a slow, grinding decline. The man I had been for the last 10 years, she explained with a gentle, pained sorrow, was a man who had tried and failed. The small engineering firm I had apparently started had gone bankrupt 5 years ago, a victim of a bad economy and a few disastrous contracts. We had lost our beautiful home, the one from the earlier photos, the one I vaguely remembered being so proud of. We had been forced to sell it to cover the business debts. We had, for the last few years, been living in a small, rented apartment, struggling to make ends meet. My accident, she said, was the final cruel blow in a long series of misfortunes. We were in debt. Our savings were gone. Her job as a freelance artist was our only source of income, and now that was gone too as she had to become my full-time caregiver. Her sacrifice was breathtaking. She bathed me, she fed me, she read to me. She fought with the insurance companies, she managed our meager finances. She protected me from the harsh, ugly reality of our situation with a fierce, unwavering devotion. My love for her, the woman I only knew from photographs and her own stories, deepened into a form of reverent awe. I was a burden, a broken thing, the author of our shared misery. And yet she loved me. She cared for me. She stayed. In the quiet darkness of the night, when the terror of my own empty mind would threaten to consume me, she would hold me and whisper that it didn't matter. The money didn't matter, the house didn't matter. We had each other and that was enough. I saw her as an angel, a being of impossible grace and strength. I would look at this beautiful, vibrant woman and I would be consumed by a guilt so profound it was a physical pain. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and now she was trapped in the wreckage with me. My recovery became my single, driving obsession, not for myself but for her. I had to get better. I had to find a way to unburden her, to repay the impossible debt I owed her. I had no idea that the life she was describing was a meticulously crafted fiction, and my role in it was not that of a husband to be loved, but of a prisoner to be managed. The first crack in the beautiful, tragic story she had built for me was almost imperceptible, a hairline fracture in a flawless facade. It was about a year after the accident. My physical recovery was slow but steady. I was walking with a cane, and my speech, though sometimes slurred when I was tired, was mostly clear. The memories, however, remained a stubborn, locked door. My life was still the narrative she had given me. We were at a small, local library, an outing she had suggested to get me out of the apartment. I was browsing a shelf of old magazines, and I picked one up, a glossy architectural digest from about 4 years prior. I was flipping through the pages, a mindless, pleasant distraction when I saw it. A full-page feature on a stunning, minimalist house of glass and steel, a house that was both completely alien and shockingly, painfully familiar. The title of the article was "The Engineer's Retreat," and the name of the owner, the designer, was my own. I stared at the pictures, at the man in the photo who was me, younger, healthier, standing proudly on a deck I had no memory of building, but which I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic I had. I looked at the woman beside me in the photo. It was her, radiant and happy, her arm linked through mine. The article described me not as a failed businessman, but as one of the most innovative and successful structural engineers in the region. It spoke of my firm, not as a bankrupt failure, but as a thriving, award-winning company. It detailed the sale of my first patent for a seven-figure sum. It was a life of immense, undeniable success. A life that directly, completely contradicted the story she had told me. I showed her the magazine, my hand trembling, my mind a chaotic storm of confusion. "What is this?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. Her reaction was a masterpiece of loving, patient concern. She took the magazine from my hands, her expression a mask of profound, gentle sorrow. She looked at me, her eyes full of a pity that made me feel small and broken. "Oh, my love," she said, her voice a soft, sad melody. "This is what the doctors warned us about, confabulation. When the brain tries to fill in the blank spaces with things that aren't real. This was a dream of yours, a fantasy. You were always sketching houses like this. You must have imagined it so vividly that now, after the accident, your mind thinks it was real." She was so calm, so loving, so utterly convincing. She was offering me a logical medical explanation for the impossible dissonance in my head. My brain was broken. It was creating false memories. The alternative, that she was lying, was so monstrous, so unthinkable that my mind refused to even consider it. I felt a wave of shame. I was not just a physical cripple, I was a mental one. My own mind was betraying me. I apologized to her, my voice thick with embarrassment, and I let her lead me out of the library. But the seed was planted. The hairline fracture had begun to spread. The fragments started to come more often after that. Not memories, but feelings, instincts. I would be watching a financial news channel, and I would understand the complex jargon of the stock market with a fluency that a failed, struggling engineer should not possess. I would pick up a pen and find my hand sketching complex structural formulas, a language I had no memory of learning but which my fingers knew intimately. Each instance was a fresh wave of vertigo, another piece of evidence that the man I was did not align with the man she told me I had been. I began my own investigation, a secret, fumbling search for my own identity. It had to be done in secret. To question her again would be to admit my own madness, to cause her more pain. I waited until she was asleep, and I would go to the old laptop we shared. I started with my own name, a simple, desperate search, and the digital ghost of my former self began to emerge. I found old articles about my company, praising its innovative designs. I found records of the patents I held. I found public property records for the house in the magazine, a house we had sold, she had told me, to cover my business debts. The sale date was 2 days after my accident, not 5 years before. I found the corporate filings for my company. It had not gone bankrupt. It had been sold, a quick, private sale to our largest competitor for a price that seemed shockingly, criminally low. The date of the sale was 1 week after my accident. A pattern was emerging, a horrifying, undeniable timeline. My accident had not been the final blow in a long decline. It had been the starting gun for a rapid, systematic liquidation of my entire life. She hadn't been managing our decline, she had been engineering it. The woman who was my caregiver, my angel, my only link to a past I couldn't remember, had not been telling me a story of our shared struggle. She had been feeding me a fiction, a carefully constructed alternate reality designed to cover the tracks of a crime so profound, so intimately cruel that I had no name for it. The last 10 years were not a blank space. They were a crime scene, and I was living with the primary suspect. My life became a performance. By day, I was the grateful, memory-impaired patient, leaning on her for everything, my face a carefully constructed mask of love and dependence. By night, while she slept, I was a ghost, a digital archaeologist, sifting through the ruins of a life she had tried to bury. I was a stranger to myself, and my only goal was to piece together the man I had been, so I could understand the monster she had become. The investigation was a slow, painstaking process. I had to relearn the skills of my former life, not the engineering but the logic, the analytical precision. I taught myself how to trace digital footprints, how to access archived public records, how to think like an investigator. Every new discovery was another brick in the wall of her monstrous deception. I found the bank records, not our shared account which held the meager disability checks, but our old accounts, the ones she told me had been closed for years. I gained access through a series of lucky guesses at old security questions, questions whose answers were buried in the part of my memory that was still intact. The transaction histories were a roadmap to her betrayal. In the weeks immediately following my accident, while I was lying in a coma, she had been a whirlwind of activity. She had systematically emptied every account, transferring millions of dollars into a series of newly created corporate entities with anonymous, generic names. The money from the sale of my company, the proceeds from the sale of our home, the entire contents of our seven-figure investment portfolio. It had all been funneled into a complex web of shell corporations designed to make it disappear. And then there was the insurance. We had a substantial life insurance policy on me, but we also had something called a critical care rider, a clause that paid out a lump sum in the event of a debilitating, life-altering injury. The payout was massive. And it had been paid directly to her, the sole beneficiary, 3 months after the accident. The woman who had been pretending to struggle to pay for my medication, who had been praised by doctors for her selfless sacrifice, had been sitting on a fortune. My fortune. The why of it was still a gaping hole. This was not the act of a desperate woman. This was the cold, calculated execution of a long-term plan. The accident had not been the inspiration for the crime. It was simply the perfect opportunity. It had given her what she needed, a medically sanctioned reason for my confusion, my lack of oversight, my complete and total dependence on her. It had turned me from her partner into her prisoner. The search for a motive led me to her personal emails, a line I had been hesitant to cross, but one that was now a grim necessity. I found what I was looking for in a series of deleted messages I was able to recover, a correspondence with a man I did not know. His name meant nothing to me, but their intimacy was unmistakable. The emails stretched back for years, long before my accident. They were not just lovers, they were partners. They had been planning this for a very long time. They had a shared dream, a vision of a new life together, a life of wealth and freedom on a tropical island. My success, my wealth, was the bank they were planning to rob. They were just waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity to pull the trigger. My accident was a gift to them, a blessing, as he had called it in one of the emails. It was the perfect, blameless, tragic event that gave her the cover she needed to execute their plan flawlessly. I was not just a man who had lost his memory. I had been the victim of a conspiracy so intimate and so cruel it felt like something from a nightmare. The woman who held my hand and told me she loved me was not just a liar, she was a predator. And her care, her devotion, her sacrifice was nothing more than the careful, patient guarding of an asset. She was protecting her investment. She was keeping me alive but broken until the money was clean and the path to her new life was clear. The sheer, psychopathic coldness of it was almost impossible to comprehend. She had watched me struggle, watched me suffer, watched me consumed with guilt for the ruin I believed I had brought upon her, and she had felt nothing. She had played her part with the skill of a master actress, her performance so convincing that it had created my entire reality. The love I felt for her, the profound, worshipful gratitude was real. But it was a love for a fictional character, a ghost she had created. The real woman was a stranger, a monster hiding behind the face of an angel. I had to escape, but how? I was still physically vulnerable. I was financially destitute, at least on paper, and she controlled every aspect of my life. A direct confrontation was impossible. She would simply call the doctors, tell them I was having a psychotic break, a side effect of my brain injury. They would believe her. She was the devoted, long-suffering wife. I was the damaged, confused patient. It was her word against mine. And in the world she had so expertly constructed, my word was worthless. The escape plan was the most complex and important project I had ever designed. It required me to use the skills of the man I used to be, the meticulous, detail-oriented engineer, while simultaneously playing the part of the broken, dependent man she believed me to be. It was a war fought on two fronts, one in the digital world of my secret investigation and the other in the quiet, suffocating intimacy of our small apartment. I had to become a better actor than she was. I leaned into the role of the patient. I feigned more confusion than I felt. I would forget things she had just told me. I would stumble more often. I made myself smaller, more pathetic, more dependent, lulling her into a false sense of security. The more helpless I appeared, the less she guarded her own actions. She became complacent, convinced that her prisoner was fully pacified. Meanwhile, in the dead of night, I was a hive of activity. I had an objective. I needed a piece of irrefutable, third-party evidence that would destroy her narrative. I needed something that could not be dismissed as a product of my damaged mind. I found it in a detail buried deep in the financial records of one of her shell corporations. It was a series of payments to a private storage facility on the other side of the city. The payments were small, monthly, and consistent. Why would she need a storage unit? We lived in a small apartment with barely enough possessions to fill it. What was she hiding? I knew I had to get inside that unit. Getting out of the apartment without her knowledge was the first major hurdle. I created a diversion. I feigned a small medical crisis, a series of dizzy spells which prompted a visit to a new specialist. I chose the specialist myself, one whose office was on the other side of town, near the storage facility. During the appointment, which I insisted on attending alone to prove a small measure of independence, I faked a call from the pharmacy about a prescription mix-up, giving me a plausible reason to leave for an hour. It was a risky, desperate move, but it worked. I took a taxi to the storage facility, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I had the unit number but no key, no access code. I was prepared for this. I had studied the facility on Google Maps. I saw that it backed onto a small wooded area. I found a weak point in the perimeter fence, a place where I could slip through unnoticed. I made my way to her unit. The lock was a simple combination lock. I had watched her, studied her. I knew the combinations she used for our luggage for her phone. They were all dates: her birthday, her mother's birthday, the date of our wedding, a cruel, ironic twist. The third combination I tried, the date of my accident, clicked open. The metal door slid up with a low, rumbling groan, and what I saw inside was not a collection of old furniture or boxes. It was a life in waiting. There were expensive, brand-new suitcases, the kind you take on a one-way trip to paradise. There were boxes filled with designer clothes, many with the tags still on. There was a small safe, and through a stroke of luck, the key was in a small magnetic box attached to the underside of a metal shelf. Inside the safe were passports, not just hers, but one for her lover, the man from the emails. And there were bearer bonds, thousands of dollars in untraceable liquid assets. This was their escape kit, the final, tangible proof of their plan. I didn't touch anything. I simply took out my phone and I documented it all. I took clear, time-stamped photos and videos of everything: the passports, the bonds, the new luggage. I recorded myself narrating what I was seeing, my voice steady and clear, explaining the context. This was my proof. This was the evidence that could not be refuted, that could not be dismissed as a confabulation of a broken mind. This was her betrayal in a 10 by 10 foot box. I returned to the doctor's office just as my allotted hour was up, my heart a triumphant drum. The game had changed. I was no longer the prisoner. I was the hunter. The final confrontation was not an emotional explosion. It was a quiet, clinical execution. I waited for the right moment. A few days later, I had already sent copies of the evidence to a lawyer my brother had found for me, a shark from my old world who understood the nature of the battle to come. I sat her down at the kitchen table. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed my phone on the table between us. I had created a small, simple slideshow. The first picture was of the storage unit, the door rolled open. The second was a close-up of the passports, hers and his. The third was a picture of the bearer bonds. I let her look at them in silence. The color drained from her face. The mask of the loving, patient caregiver dissolved, not into rage, not into fear, but into a kind of cold, profound stillness. It was the look of a grandmaster who has just realized they have been led into an inescapable checkmate. The asset has become self-aware, I said, using the words I had read in their emails. The liability is severing the connection. I stood up and walked to the door. I had a single bag packed, containing the few possessions that were truly mine. My lawyer will be in touch with yours, I said, although I suspect your partner in this venture may have his own legal counsel to retain. I walked out of that apartment, out of the life she had invented for me, and I did not look back. I was walking into a world where I had no money, no home, and a past that was a minefield of lies and trauma. But for the first time in a very long time, I was free. I was no longer a patient, no longer a prisoner. I was a man who had woken up. And I was finally ready to start remembering who I was. The legal battle was brutal, but with the evidence I had, the outcome was never in doubt. She and her lover were charged with a litany of crimes, from fraud to conspiracy. Her defense, that she was managing the assets of a mentally incompetent husband, collapsed under the weight of the video from the storage unit. She was a national news story for a week, the beautiful, devoted wife who was revealed to be a monster. I never saw her again after that day. I made a conscious choice to erase her from my life, just as she had tried to erase me from mine. Rebuilding has been the hardest thing I have ever done. It is not a story with a happy ending, not yet. There is no triumphant return to wealth, no new love story waiting in the wings. There is only the quiet, daily work of putting the pieces of a shattered life back together. I am a man with a 10-year hole in his soul, a ghost story where I am the ghost. But the memories are slowly coming back, not as a flood, but as a quiet tide, bringing fragments of the man I used to be back to the shore of the man I am now. And I am learning to build a new life, not on the shifting sands of a shared dream, but on the solid bedrock of my own hard-won truth. My name is my own again, and it is the only asset I truly need. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.